Ever just feel a bit off? Like not actually sick, but maybe a little headachy, foggy, or your skin's just not happy.
Yeah, that vague feeling.
Exactly. Well, today we're going to dive into a tiny chemical messenger, histamine, that might be pulling more strings behind the scenes than you think.
That's right. Most people hear histamine and, immediately think allergies, sneezing, itching,
Yeah,
all that fun stuff.
right, the usual suspects.
But it does so much more. Today, our mission is really to explore its connections to bigger body cycles. Think metabolism, energy use, maybe even sleep.
And we're using a couple of sources for this deep dive, right? An article about histamine intolerance.
From Wyndly, yeah. And a pretty dense but fascinating scientific study looking at histamine receptors and how they affect metabolism.
Okay, so let's try and make sense of it all. Maybe even have a little fun with it. First up, that Wyndly article clears up something important right away. You can't actually be allergic to histamine itself, can you?
No, you can't. Which sounds weird, but histamine is something our own bodies make. It gets released during an allergic reaction, sure, as part of the immune response.
Oh, okay, so it's part of the reaction, not the thing you react to.
Exactly. The key thing, like the article says, is the difference between an allergy, which isn't really a thing for histamine itself, and histamine intolerance.
Histamine intolerant. Okay, so what's that then? Is it like having too much histamine around?
Sort of, yeah. It's more that your body has trouble breaking it down efficiently. So histamine builds up either from what your body makes or what you eat, and that causes symptoms that feel a lot like allergies.
Gotcha. So it's not the histamine itself that's bad, it's just the excess, like too much of a good thing.
Well, histamine does have good roles. Local immune defense, it's a neurotransmitter carrying signals. It's important stuff. But yeah, when the breakdown process can't keep up, you get that overload.
And the symptoms, according to Wyndley, are kind of this weird mix, aren't they? Like headaches,
Headaches are common.
nasal congestion, skin stuff like hives or rashes.
Yeah. Digestive problems definitely feature too.
Right. Tummy troubles. And even like irregular periods. It feels like a real grab bag of unpleasantness.
It absolutely can be. It really throws things off balance. So why does this buildup happen? That brings us to the main enzyme responsible for breaking down histamine.
Okay, there's an enzyme for that.
Yep. It's called diamine oxidase, or DAO for short. The Wyndly article points out that histamine intolerance is often linked to not having enough DAO activity.
So DAO is like the histamine cleanup crew.
That's a great way to put it. And if the crew is short-staffed or, maybe their equipment isn't working right, the histamine just hangs around longer than it should.
Makes sense. What slows down the cleanup crew then? What affects DAO?
Well, the article mentions a few things. Gut issues, like certain GI disorders, can lower DAO production. Some medications can interfere with it too.
Oh, interesting. Meds?
Alcohol is another one. And even your genetics can play a part. Some people just naturally produce less DAO.
Ugh, genetics again.
Yeah.
Always lurking in the background. So it's not just about the breakdown side, is it? It's also about how much histamine is coming in.
Absolutely. That's a key point from Wyndly, dietary histamine. If your DAO is already struggling, eating foods high in histamine can really tip the scales.
And those are often the tasty foods, right? Like fermented things.
Often, yeah. Think sauerkraut, kimchi, aged cheeses. Yum.
Aged meats, maybe red wine.
Red wine, definitely. Those things contain histamine, and if your body's already having trouble clearing it, eating more just adds to the load. It's like pouring water into a sink that's already draining slowly.
Okay, that makes sense. So histine's a signaling molecule. DAO cleans it up. But if DAO is low or overwhelmed, we get symptoms. Now, let's get into the really complex stuff. Metabolism, that PMC study you mentioned.
Right. This is where it gets super interesting. This study looks specifically at how histamine affects glucose, blood sugar and lipid or fat metabolism. Mostly in mice, but the findings are pretty suggestive.
How did they figure that out?
They used mice that were genetically engineered to lack certain histamine receptors. Histamine needs to dock onto these receptors on cells to actually do its job. Think of it like a key needing a specific lock.
Okay, so different keys for different doors.
Exactly. They focused on two main receptors, H1R and H2R. By knocking out one or the other, they could see what specific jobs each receptor was doing in metabolism.
And what happened? Was it just like less histamine action means messed up metabolism?
Not quite that simple, actually. It was surprisingly specific. The mice missing the H2R receptor, that's H2R, they had some major problems.
Major like?
like significant insulin resistance. Their bodies just weren't responding well to insulin, which is crucial for managing blood sugar. They also developed glucose intolerance and pretty severe signs of fatty liver disease, like NASH.
Whoa, fatty liver just from missing one histamine receptor. That sounds serious, like a huge traffic jam in the body's energy system.
It really points to H2R being critical for keeping liver metabolism and glucose handling in check. But then the mice missing the other receptor, H1R, they were different.
Different how? Better.
Not necessarily better, just different. They had milder insulin resistance, but they tended to become obese with more overall body fat.
Huh. So H2R seems linked to liver health and sugar control, while H1R might be more about overall fat storage. It's like they have different territories.
It certainly looks that way. Two different receptors, two distinct metabolic roles, almost opposing in some ways. And the study also found a link with H2R and a hormone called adiponectin.
Adiponectin. I've heard of that. Isn't that generally a good hormone for metabolism?
Yeah, it helps with insulin sensitivity, fat breakdown, good stuff. The mice without H2R had lower levels of adiponectin, which likely played into their liver and insulin problems.
Okay, so histamine signaling, especially via H2R, seems really important for keeping that metabolic balance, particularly in the liver. Wild.
It is. But then the study went another step further. They looked at the brains of these mice.
The brains. How does histamine affect brain metabolism?
They used PET scans, those imaging techniques that show how tissues are using energy, specifically glucose. And they found something really intriguing.
Okay, what was it?
The mice missing the H1R receptor. They actually showed increased glucose uptake in their brains.
Wait, more sugar going into the brain when H1R was missing. That seems counterintuitive.
Right. It suggests that maybe histamine, acting through H1R, normally puts some kind of brake on how much glucose the brain uses.
So could H1R signaling be involved in regulating the brain's energy demands? Maybe shifting between like high energy alertness and lower energy rest?
That's exactly the kind of question this raises. Could histamine, via H1R, be part of managing our daily energy cycles, our circadian rhythm?
Wow. Okay, that connects back to what you said earlier about cyclical processes.
Exactly. The researchers themselves mentioned that other hormones involved in energy balance, like leptin and insulin, probably interact with this histamine signaling in the brain. It's painting a picture of histamine as a potential key player in regulating brain energy states.
Which could tie into things like feeling alert versus feeling drowsy.
Potentially, yeah. It's complex, but the link seems plausible.
Okay, let's try and stitch this all together. Histamine, way more than allergies.
Definitely.
This study shows it's deeply involved in managing energy, sugar, and fat. And it does different things depending on the receptor, H1R or H2R.
Right. H2R looks crucial for liver health, blood sugar control. H1R seems more tied to overall fat storage and, maybe surprisingly, brain glucose use.
And if we loop back to the inflammation aspect mentioned in the Wyndly article, inflammation itself can have cycles.
It can, absolutely. So histamine's role there could be another way it influences various body rhythms.
Plus, didn't we see somewhere else that histamine is involved in the sleep-wake cycle directly?
Yes, that's a known function. It helps regulate wakefulness. So these findings about brain glucose use via H1R could potentially tie into that mechanism. It's like histamine is this tiny operator at a massive switchboard.
Yeah, flipping switches that affect immunity, digestion, metabolism, maybe even when we feel awake or tired. It's amazing.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is and how one molecule can wear so many different hats depending on where it is and what it's interacting with.
So for everyone listening, the big takeaway here is maybe. Pay attention to your body's signals. Could things like fatigue or those random headaches or even energy slumps be related to your personal histamine situation?
It's certainly possible. It raises an interesting thought, doesn't it? Could something like keeping a food and symptom diary, tracking potential high histamine foods against how you feel day to day, your energy, your sleep, reveal some patterns?
That's a really practical idea, a low-stakes way to do your own little deep dive.
Exactly. You might uncover connections you hadn't considered.
Absolutely, because this journey into histamine shows it's not just the allergy bad guy. It's a key player in energy management, linked to brain function, and maybe even those daily rhythms that govern our lives. Super fascinating stuff.
For sure. And research is ongoing, so we'll likely learn even more about this molecule's wide-ranging influence.
So stay curious, maybe track those triggers, and keep exploring the amazing chemistry happening inside you every single second.